we kind of glossed over the fact that you are the art director for Ranger Rick, which I subscribed to as a child. And one doesn't just become the art director, I assume, for Ranger Rick just off the street. So for all those aspiring comic artists who want to say, I love to draw, I love to create, how am I going to make a living? How did you take what was a passion from when you're 5 and you're writing the car theme heroes to become an art director for a major publication?
Well, art became such a big part of my life from that point, and it got me a lot of attention from friends and things like that. So I always leaned towards that, and it was such a part of my life that I don't think I even realized that I could make a living from it. And as a junior in high school, I was at this summer arts program in Pennsylvania, and they had a college fair, and I said to my friend, I'm like, why are these we're at an arts camp. They have a college fair. I'm like, why are these all art schools? And he's like, we're artists. Aren't you going to go to art school? And I was like, yeah, okay. And so it was very much I hadn't really thought about it. And I went to Temple's art school, Tyler, for a year. But I decided to study graphic design because graphic design had a lot of the elements that were in comics. And to me, which was, drafting, you had, you had square boxes, it was solving a problem, which is what graphic design was. And as opposed to the sort of ethereal ideas behind a lot of fine arts. Then I transferred to Penn State University, which I had sworn I would never go to because everybody in Pennsylvania seems to go to Penn State. But I found out they had a great graphic design program. So I studied there, and a lot of that was poster design, print design. We were doing multimedia and computer design at a time when a lot of places weren't yet. And so I had just decided, comics then. I got to Penn State, though, and realized they don't have any illustration classes. And I'm like, oh, my God, what am I going to do? So I took drawing classes. I took painting classes. I took design classes. And then just about every day after I got all my classes done, I would come home and I would draw till about 1 a.m. And I would pore over comic books. I taught myself how to draw comics more so than ever being taught. And it was all the comics I grew up with. It was Walt Simonson's Manhunter comics, which is pretty obscure as far as comics go, but all comics aficionados. He also did Batman, and I remember just trying to redraw the way he was, the way he drew. And so when I graduated, I just knew, the whole goal was just, hey, just got to put food on the table, got to pay my rent. And I got a job doing, essentially to date myself, doing Yellow Page ads for the phone book and for this small company. And, for me, it was always, you had an obligation to yourself, and then later on to family is you pay the bills, and then there is time to work and try to accomplish those other things, of comics. And I told myself within 5 years I'm going to publish my own comic, and it actually was closer to 10 years, but I eventually did it. I mean, I didn't really do a comic until I was about 29, and it just sort of, I got into graphic design right as the internet was really taking off. So I had a couple years that were just, hey, this is great. And I had money saved up. I could self-publish my own comics. And a lot of the ideas of putting a book together, there were a lot of artists. I had friends that had drawn Batman, but they didn't know how to design a book to send off to a printer. So I became this advisor to a lot of comic book artists, people who'd done Batman and Spider-Man. And that was kind of how I learned even more. And, there's ups and downs of the tech bubble burst. And I would go from doing web design to print design. I was doing Flash animation for a while. And it was really, the trick was anytime someone said, can you do this? I'd say, sure. And there were often days where I was teaching myself how to use a program. I became director of animation for a design company, and basically was looking out of the book, designing, doing an animation that was due the next day. And a lot of that is just like in publishing. You're not always given what you want. Like they don't always hand you what you want as a writer if you have an article to write or so in this case it was I'll learn how to do it. And then for a couple of years my children, their school was a small school in Virginia. They didn't have an art teacher. And I was adamant, you've got to have an art teacher. And they were like, well, it's part-time because it's a small school. Would you want to do it? So 2 days a week, I started becoming an art teacher while I was also doing design. And after this long-winded story, what happened was after the first time in 30 years, an art director job popped up at Ranger Rick because they had the same art director for 30 years. And I just happened to be looking for work at that point. And it was that combination of the comics, doing stuff for kids, the art teacher job. Like it really became this job. It was as though I had been training for this for so long because Ranger Rick is all about teaching kids about wildlife and nature, but it's got to be fun. So you're trying like, how can we educate and enlighten people, but also make it interesting? And Ranger Rick's been that perfect combination. I mean, the biggest thing was I actually had a budget to hire other people who are better than me to draw. So we often have artwork done by some great, fantastic illustrators. And what's really neat is I've also gotten to hire a couple people that I really look up to. And I for the second year in a row for the Halloween issue, our October issue, which is my favorite issue, I was able to hire Tom Richmond from Mad Magazine to do the artwork for an article. And so, you know, I got him to draw like Dracula and the Wolfman. And the whole article is actually about these plants that look like they're out of a horror movie. Like there's one called the Devil's Fingers, and there's one plant that smells like rotting flesh. And he was just the perfect artist for it. So yeah, it's not a job that comes along for everybody. And I just happen to have all the weird little things to combine to be part of that. And I've learned so much too, because I know more about nature. I think I'm annoying, definitely annoying all my family at Thanksgiving when I'm yelling at them about recycling or, weed killer, the dangers of weed killer. And even my wife doesn't make me rake up quite as many leaves because it's actually not as good. It's actually better to leave the leaves for the winter.
Oh, I'm playing that clip for my wife.
Yeah, I'll have to send you that issue.
We're gonna leave the leaves on the ground this year, honey.
Right.
I've got confirmation. Well, I think our esteemed audience knows that they need to recycle and how important that is. Why is weed killer a bad idea?
Well, weed killer, the problem with weed killer is it not only kills the weeds, it will, certain kinds, there's some that are actually safer. A lot of weed killers, especially because they're so concentrated, will also kill all the insects that are in the grass and the worms, the things that actually keep the grass healthy underneath the dirt. So they talk a lot about using alternate types of weed killers. And, that's actually, there's an adult magazine called National Wildlife that covers a lot more of that. But we have a comic book section of every issue of Ranger Rick now. When you were reading it, it was more of a story, but now they have a 3 to 4 page comic starring Ranger Rick, Scarlet Fox, and Boomer Badger. And they travel around, and sometimes it's an ecological lesson, and other times it's just learning about other kinds of animals. Like, I'm trying to think. There was one about sharks coming down the rivers towards otters in certain places in the United States. And part of it was because of climate change, which we don't shy away from anymore. That was one of those things where is the sharks were kind of getting confused and going down these rivers, or they're looking for food because they can't find it in the ocean. And, it's kind of neat to see that comics used in such a great educational way. It's always the favorite part of the magazine. Like we had one issue, we left it out because we had a very long article, and we never had so many complaints as when the comic was taken out. So I'm very proud of that. I don't draw it. I art direct it, and I work with the writers and the artists for that. And it's just really fun to have this character that's been around for about 55 years now.
Look at you! You're glowing as you talk about your job at Ranger Rick. This is a man who truly loves what he does.
I do, and it's funny because some people I know, they want to do just like if I was doing just Max Meow, that would be great. But I do think in some ways I'm a better author because I do have other influences coming in. And I think a lot of writers and artists, they have other ways. Like some people it's music or movies. And plus I drive my wife crazy if I was just home all the time. So.